Hello and welcome to the second session of today's ESG Summit. And I don't want to mess around. I want to get straight into it. And I'm going to bring Anu onto the screen. Hello, Anu.
Hi.
Nice to have you back. Anu was on a few minutes earlier, if you didn't watch the previous session. So, Anu, we're going to have a chat about DEI, that thorny topic of DEI. And so let's just get straight into it, shall we?
Yes, please.
Anu, tell me if you could just bear with me. So how can organisations protect and advance DEI initiatives in a climate where such efforts are increasingly politicised and restricted? So, you know, it's tough at the moment.
It is, and it's a very topical question. Now, I think that organizations really must reframe D&I as a business imperative, not as a political stance. D&I, as we know, strengthens risk management, talent retention, decision making. These are core functions that benefit everyone. Even when legislation changes, the underlying need for inclusive leadership and equitable workplaces still remains. Right? So I think ESG isn't about ideology. It's about how we attract and support the best people to do their job.
Okay. All right. And so what does effective DEI leadership look like then?
Well, it could look like it's different for different organizations. But really, I think that D&I is about courage and collaboration. Now, what do I mean by that? It's where firms stand, where organizations stand firm on values such as dignity, equity, and belonging to an organization. It also means being strategic in terms of communication, adapting your language and framing to build bridges between diverse team individuals, not deepen the divides that already exist in society. I think it also means listening to diverse perspectives, backing up commitments with measurable outcomes, not just statements, as you have seen many corporations have mission statements with regards to D&I. And I think it's navigating the complexity around it without retreating from the purpose of D&I, which is to bring diverse workforces together to work for best outcomes.
Okay, so tell me, so should DEI initiative strategy shift in response to this, political rollbacks that we're seeing at the moment, or should they double down? Do you think? What's the answer?
I think they should adapt. Really, what they should do is adapt. Shifting shouldn't mean watering down the initiatives in the face of political or legal requirements, such as what we're seeing coming out of the US. But it needs to be smart, lawful, and intentional. And that's why we're seeing a lot of backlash against D&I initiatives. If explicit affirmative action policies are restricted, as we're seeing in the US, we need to shift to equity-based support mechanisms tied to barriers, not identity alone. And also, we should invest in inclusive leadership training, equitable promotion process, and mentorship. All legal, but they're high-impact D&I strategies.
Okay. And so how do you ensure DEI messages doesn't become, performative or reactive, in this current climate?
Yeah, I think really actions should come before announcements. You would have seen a lot of, without naming names, a lot of large organizations coming up with announcements. I think really the actions need to speak for themselves first, and then comes the announcement. Speak only when the internal work has been done. Internal committees, employees, shareholders have all been taken into account to back up those values, those announcements, and avoid generic statements in response to controversy, because that doesn't really mean anything if it's not backed by action. And instead focus on clear, consistent communication and only go public when the message is grounded in lived values and real progress.
Okay, and what about the future of DEI?
I actually think the future of DE&I is more integrated than we realize. It's also going to be data driven because shareholders and other stakeholders will request or will want access to data that demonstrates a certain D&I policy. And it's going to be employee centered. Ultimately, if the employees in the business are not happy, or policies aren't really in such a way that includes them, then there's going to be a problem. And I think it's really moving from initiative to embedded practices in performance reviews, leadership development, and strategy, and from performative to more outcome focused, measurable progress in terms of pay equity, representation, and retention, and from isolated teams to enterprise-wide accountability. And I think despite pushback, the demand for workplaces where people feel safe, respected, and seen is only growing. So despite what's happening in the political world, the true story on the ground is very much different, especially among younger talent, global markets, and ESG conscious investments. So I think D&I's future lies not in slogans, but in systems built into how we hire, lead, reward, and evolve.
Do you think that maybe that the DEI community hasn't communicated the benefits of DEI particularly well? Is that something you've got an opinion about?
Possibly, yes, and that's why we're seeing a lot of backlash, not just from the US. We're also getting companies in Europe questioning, really, because if you think about it, there's a lot of cost that's been associated with these affirmative D&I policies, and actually the real data hasn't really come through. So, organizations are right to challenge and question what's been in place. And I think what's happening now, despite it being unpleasant with a lot of the backlash, I think this will get firms to really think about the data. Can we show the data that backs DE&I? Of course, there's some might say a responsibility to build inclusive organizations, but really the data needs to back it, and it has backed it. But I think more firms are coming out to show that data to shareholders to say, actually, these are the outcomes, and therefore, from a commercial perspective, it makes absolute sense to have maybe not D&I how it would have been run, but maybe in a slightly newer form with data integration.
Anu, thank you very much. That was very interesting. We'll get you back on the ESG show again in the future, but thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Before you go, anything you want to add?
No, I think there's a lot of noise in the market in terms of D&I. If you can sort of see above the parapet and just forget the noise and really wait for organizations to really reframe, as I say, reframe these D&I policies, not watering them down, but just refocusing on what really matters. And these are creating equitable places of work where commercial outcomes matter. They always have mattered, but really correlating and aligning those initiatives. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. Thank you. And now we're joined, I've been looking forward to this conversation with Brigadier Tim Simmons. I shortchanged you there. Brigadier Tim Simmons, OBE, the Head of Climate Change and Sustainability for the British Army. And Tim's on a mission to embed ESG into military strategy. Thank you very much for joining us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Before we get started, have you any thoughts about the conversation we just had about DEI at all?
Hey, Margaret, thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to be on the ESG show with you today.
It's our pleasure. It's absolutely our pleasure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. The bit that really struck me is around turning kind of strategy into action, and the bit around making this actually it can't just be words and stuff. It's how do you turn all the great ideas and this into action? Otherwise, it's just words on a page.
Okay, great. So I'm very intrigued. So can you just tell me a little bit about the relationship between the military and ESG? Some people might think they're strange bedfellows.
Yeah.
Or think about ESG, sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability in defence, and it's interesting since I've worked in this space. Often I speak to people and they kind of, as soon as they find out I'm in the military, you see the raised eyebrows. But why? Why are you talking about sustainability? Why is this important for defence? It's two different things. You're just an emitter, or with your big tanks and all of your diesel. So I think it's important in lots of ways. I think, first of all, if you think about what is the role of an army? It's to respond to emerging threats. It's about the geopolitical position. It's about stability and security. You can't have a secure and stable world unless it's sustainable. Those things have got to come together. So if you think around some of the real challenges around, people have been fighting over resources since Neanderthals for early humans. That kind of resource conflict is only getting worse as we look at a population explosion from 2.5 billion in 1950 through to 8 billion now. We're heading for peak human at 10 billion. Overconsumption's out of control. We're over-farming our land. Biodiversity is decreasing. Access to food is harder. Then link that to water security, human security, forced migration, health, pandemics. It's really in our interest to understand what is going to be the impact on the world. As we know, we've already busted through 1.5 degrees, and we're heading for, the government I think is now saying, well, 2.4 is a new target. Well, if you look at what that means in terms of what that's going to do to our food security, water security, health security, and kind of future pandemics, then clearly that's something that we have to absolutely understand. First of all, there's a danger because the army's a hammer; it will always look for a nail. So does that mean we've got to use ourselves in a different way? And then there's an opportunity, and there is something around the requirement to collaborate and innovate. So there's some really exciting technology in the energy technology revolution that we absolutely should be at the forefront. Using military innovation as a test bed, if you like.
Okay, thanks for that. So like a lot of people, I've been thinking a little bit about defence lately. Not something I used to think that much about. And as I thought about it, I became aware, actually, defence has been a driver of innovation. If you take the US as an example, the internet came about through a defence project originally. Silicon Valley, I believe, had its roots in an American defence project. GPS, and we talked about this on the phone the other day, how the evolution of flight was sped up enormously by the first two world wars, and I think you've probably got many more examples of that. So it's often seen as a test bed for innovation. Does that apply to sustainability too? Can the military drive innovation in the sustainability arena, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. I would be so bold to say that the military are leaders in innovation. Sometimes we're criticised quite rightly for the time it sometimes takes us to get from a kind of concept through to delivery. But you've rightly pointed out some of the great examples. But most of those came from jeopardy, right? So the jet engine, tracked vehicles out of tanks, the internet, the kind of GPS satellites. They all came from a time where there was an absolute requirement coming, whether it was the Second World War or into globalization. Those were the things that the world needed. And so, where at what point does this become the same sense of jeopardy that the army's forced into a way where it has to innovate its way out of trouble? We're generally better when we're being forced to innovate to fix a problem. And for me, this challenge comes down to that kind of, is this seen as the current problem by the government, by the military, that it needs to solve, or is it more focused on potentially the near term? On the positive side, I would say that the energy technology revolution, there is an acceptance that is like a general purpose technology. It will change the world like AI has changed the world, and you can either be at the forefront of that, or you can watch your competitors seek competitive advantage. And by that I mean they will seek the advantage to win by leveraging innovation and technology quicker than we do. Then that is not a place we want to be. So we don't want to get left behind. And so the areas that I've found really interesting that we've looked at so far, hybrid electric drive vehicles as a great example. Not just the fact that you can drive them in, they become quiet. They're actually better at performance, more torque. When you park them up, you can then off-grid power from the vehicle to run your control point without setting off any thermal emission. So there's that side of competitive advantage. They also use less fuel, so they're easier to resupply. And again, military logisticians have been struggling with how to supply big armies moving and using lots of resources since Xerxes, built his pontoons across the Dardanelles. It's always been a problem. If we can use less fuel and less water and less bulky stuff, not only is it means that our supply chains are lower, we can be more agile, and also it can have a much better impact on the environment. So there are areas like hydroelectric drive, microgrids, where absolutely innovation is taking place, but only in collaboration with the real experts across industry and academia.
Okay. And can you just talk a little bit more about the competitive advantage, and how does that link to your vision for a sustainability future?
Yeah, so that's really important for us. We need to innovate, and we need to fail in the testing environment. We can't fail on operations, so we got to fail really fast now. We got to learn really quickly. We got to innovate, and actually, all of this has got to start with our principles to respond to modern threats. Therefore, we have to be able to win. So we can't take any compromise against that, and that I think is sometimes the really difficult conversation that we come back to with people. And they're like, "What do you mean? You surely should be doing sustainability because it's the moral and the ethical thing to do." And I'm like, "You're 100% right. We absolutely should." But actually, when it comes down to it, if it's about our survival in a battle next year, then sustainability would only ever be able to be driven forward if it's not at the expense of our competitive advantage. So to be able to win comes first. And if we can win in a way that is helping with sustainability, and if we can use sustainability to win, then that's where we really, really want to get to. And again, kind of coming back to the point that I mentioned earlier, I think if you treat the army like a hammer, it'll look for nails. People you should be doing less, and you should be using less stuff, and your supply chain should be really focused on your scope 3. 100%, totally agree with all of that. But actually, what I think it'd be really sad if we end up just focused on how do we become a net zero army. I think the more exciting discussion is how do we use organisations in the government like the military to move us to a more sustainable world. So what is the role of the army in delivering a sustainable future? That I think is a much more exciting discussion.
Thank you very much. I don't think I've ever interviewed a brigadier before. I'm quite sad that my father's not still alive. He would have been very excited about this discussion. Later on today, we're talking about ESG investing, and one of the topics that is coming up is the role of defence within the ESG investing, because something you're seeing. I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't want to ask you questions so don't answer the question if I shouldn't be asking it. But I think people are having to sort of reevaluate things at the moment, because typically ESG has avoided defence companies, and all of a sudden defence is becoming a very hot topic. And I believe I understand that one of the issues that people are focusing on at the moment is how spending on the military can have a spillover benefit for the broader economy. We're out of time really, but I just wonder if you have any comments about that before we close.
So if I understand the question correctly, I think there is something there, and it's probably around there's something around UK resilience and investing in, without wanting to completely throw globalization out of the window, there's something about investing in UK industry. If UK industry is working together with the military and with government to, a great example is across our infrastructure across the military estate. We're responsible for 1.5% of the UK. We've got 750 sites, 100,000 buildings. If we can make that more resilient, if we can regenerate power back into the grid, there is a way that we can help the UK, help industry. And again, for me, this is about using the army to meet the kind of government's requirement to be at the forefront of becoming a nation that's responsible about sustainability and is kind of leading the way. Well, why not use us in a different way? And there's something in there again about innovation and investing in new technology that I think there is something in that. And there is, I acknowledge, again, I'm not avoiding the question around our, how we do our procurement. We're already looking at how do we really dig into our scope 3 and understand what is the impact of every single decision we make, and that is an important part of all of that.
Okay, and I suppose also there's an advantage of there's a military advantage if your energy can be generated at the point of use. I think I mentioned this to you on the phone when we spoke. I remember watching a film when I was a kid. I think it's called Ice Cold in
Alex.
I called him Alex, yeah. And I remember there was this Jeep going through the desert in North Africa, and they were worrying about the fuel all the time. And God, wouldn't it have been different if they had a solar panel on the roof? So presumably it can be an advantage to generate energy locally at the point of use.
Yeah, 100%. And that is again where I think there's two bits. There's some really exciting innovation around energy at the point of use. It makes you you're therefore less worried about when you're going to run out of fuel. Therefore, you can have you become more agile on the battlefield, or in a world of increasing power like drones and everything else, you have the ability to be more persistent. You can operate persistently because you don't run out of power. So I think that's really exciting. And I think there's also stuff we don't know about yet that we're going to discover. Things like atmospheric water generation as an example for humanitarian aid and disaster relief. Something I went to Jamaica to look at. If we can genuinely look at solutions to problems that the world's got, then I think there's somewhere there where not only will it help us and give us advantage, but also we can kind of help the world with this crisis. Well, thank you very much, Brigadier Tim Simmons, OBE. I think you're joining us again in the second session when you're being interviewed by Lizzie Swire. So make sure you watch that. And thank you very much indeed. Hey, thanks. Really, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you. Now I am going to hand over to Rennie at this point, and Rennie's going to be talking about greenwashing. And I'm going to leave it to you, Rennie. So I'll see you again in about 40 odd minutes.
Great. So we are going to dive into the topic of greenwashing, which these days became more like a shaming and blaming culture, but we want it to be more like an open discussion. So I would like to ask Nicole to join me already, but before we dive into the topic we do have a question to all of you, because we have a little giveaway, but only for the one that dares to ask the boldest question to our speakers. So please feel invited to ask your boldest question that you could ever imagine about greenwashing. We will answer it, of course, and the one that actually does it also gets a book. We will tell about you later about what it exactly is, but it's going to be a book about the sprint of ESG and how you can even make it into a tangible solution. Now, Nicole, I really wanted you for the opening to frame, like, why are we going to talk about greenwashing? And it's because I really like your spirit and energy. I told you that before. So yeah, I'm just going to give it to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Renee. I guess I do have quite a lot of passion about this topic. And I think, yeah, let's talk about greenwashing. Not to point fingers, of course, but to understand how we got here and how to move forward, right? So we've created a system where ESG and sustainability are oversold as easy wins, higher profits, better talent, cheaper capital. You've heard this before, and that's not how value works. And those promises backfired for a lot of different organizations. So companies are now stuck between this rising regulatory pressure and public expectations, limited understanding, and tools to measure what actually matters. And yes, I would say, part of the blame lies with us, the ESG and sustainability community. We've contributed to this noise with big claims and not enough operational realism. And that's why we're seeing, 4.5 billion in greenwashing fines and investor trusts collapsing. Now, it's not just us. It's let's reframe. So let's reframe the greenwashing through transparency and shared responsibility, if we look at it from this perspective. So the corporates need to stop dressing up ambition as achievement. And governments need to align policy with market tools, not just penalties, right? They have to meet us halfway, where they're helping us to get there. ESG leaders need to lead with integrity and not just marketing language, right? Not just things that pull on your heartstrings or make you feel fearful. And society as a whole, we need to be willing to engage in the trade-offs, the real trade-offs for real sustainability that sustainability actually requires. So this talking honestly about greenwashing, I think it's our chance to reset, right? To build trust, not on optics, but on clarity, nuance, and real credible progress.
That's
What about
beautiful.
you?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And especially because I know you have such an advanced background in the practical way of circular thinking. And I think especially your living environment, it's one of the most, I think, telling examples of how we could do things. I want to leave it up to you to tell us a little bit about that. But what also interests me is because you are so experienced, you saw so many topics and so many lack of circular thinking. Why is this so difficult for people? And why do we frame it in a way that we start blaming and shaming with the term greenwashing instead of talking about it? Because it is complex. It's not normal, and it's not yet normal to think circular. Why is that?
Yeah. Or think with a wider lens.
Yes.
I think that's more of the, we fear what we don't understand or we don't know. Right. So we look through our own lens in a very specific context and frame. And to actually think sustainably, you have to think from a more, economic scale of vision where you have this mega, macro, meso, micro viewpoint. Like, not only how does it affect, the core of your company or you as an individual, but the ecosystem itself. And I think that that's where the circularity part comes along, where we've had discussions before, Renee, is that it's not just, thinking about the environment. It's not just thinking about the social aspects. It's the ecosystem, how one decision could impact positively in one way, but negatively in another. So we have to consider all aspects, right? And I think it's really cool that you've been working in South America as well with these kind of areas as much as I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know the struggle. And that makes me, if we can bring in Paul as well, because what we face mostly, Nicole, is that we forgot maybe the origin of the whole ESG framework. And I'm so glad that we have Paul because he was there at the start. And I think it's a nice bridge to ask Paul to share with us, how did it actually start, Paul?
Hi, Nicole. Good to meet. And Rennie, thank you. Great setup conversation. Look, I'll do the Formula One version in terms of. So I ran a unit in the UN called UNEP Finance Initiatives from 2000 to 2012. And in the early noughties, we sort of forged an incredible team of bright young players, not particularly big. The fundamental basis of ESG started in 2001-2, where we asked the question, socially responsible investing, ethical investing, corporate social responsibility, it's all fine, but you're never going to hit mainstream finance. How do we attract the largest investors in the world, the pension funds, the insurance reserves, the sovereign wealth funds? You have to speak to them in the language of financial materiality and fiduciary duty. And that was the very inception point. How we ended up at ESG was the first letter we put out to the sell side, to Deutsche Bank and Goldman's and JP Morgan, was it was OHSE, Occupational Health, Safety and Environment. In 2 years, that morphed into ESG. And the reason that happened was it was that collective process of what is the language that will pierce? What is the language that will relate to both systemic risk and operational risk and sectoral risk and opportunity? So it came down to this. May of 2004, we're sitting in my office, 5 of us. It should have been GES. It should have been governance, environmental, and social. If you don't get governance right, you get nothing right. And we had a back and forth. And I planned it here. And don't forget, this was about asset owners, the biggest pools of capital. How do you speak to them? And I guess I was a journalist back in the 80s, and my instinct was, if you start with governance, it's a dry technical word. It's really important. So let's take that, put it on the end. Let's take environment. It's sexy, it's interesting, it's human, you can touch it. Even in the early noughties, we were getting metrics around environment. And the most important and the most difficult for investors or business is to get the social right. And it's always kicked into touch or flicked off the end by Milton Friedman-esque lobbyists. So we wedge it in the middle. And that was it. You know, it wasn't a straightforward conversation. It went on for hours, but we decided on ESG. There was another personal reason, which was my two young boys went to a thing called the Geneva English School, and their acronym was GES, but that's not often told. So look, seriously, it was environment is clear and touchable, social is difficult, governance is critical, and that's where we ended up. That's how we forged it. So it morphed from OHSE in about 2002 to a language based upon financial materiality, and we wired in fiduciary duty. And again, maybe to underpin this, one of the key things here was this was not to be, you know, a drop-down formulaic compliance agenda. ESG is a block. It should not be segmented. It is about changing culture and thinking in the largest asset owners. Now, in part, it's been co-opted over 20 years, and that's what capitalism does. And there's, you know, there's a $53 billion ESG industry, all right? And there's lots of compliance, there's lots of formulas, but let's forget, it was about getting the largest asset owners to ask those questions. What are systemic risks? How does it crunch my assets over the decades? And how do I manage that in the short term? So again, ESG, not E and S and G, and it's about culture change fundamentally. And I would say we at least changed the conversation over the last 20 years. Rennie, I'll stop there. You know, I hope not to be an ancient article of history. So you can, you know, I'm still very, very active with my company, the Blended Capital Group. I did 12 years in the UN and then set up Blended Capital to make a difference in the real world in terms of, you know, impact in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. And we have a thing called first mile ESG. Everyone refers to the last mile. We think it should be the first mile. First mile ESG, and working with those populations who are at the beginning of extractive value chains and need more of the value. Back to you, Ren.
We had a pretty long conversation about this, and what I loved mostly and what really it stuck with me after our conversation was that you brought it back to humanity, just simple humanity. And I even think you used words as ancient knowledge, culture. Just like you had some amazing insights from the beginning that it wasn't about all the rules. It was about just going back to us as humanity. Could you just shine a little bit more light on that for me?
Yeah, Rennie, look, you defined it. One of the things that, you know, the prep conversation was the link between artificial intelligence and ancient intelligence. That's a bridge. You know, we have to inform artificial intelligence with some of the ancient intelligence. And, you know, let me take two very brief examples of where my company focuses. So one is, you know, we set up a business in Western Kenya, around Kisumu, around Lake Victoria, where there are 20,000 boats on Lake Victoria, where, you know, fishing and protein is key for the communities around that area. Traditionally, a lot of the boats used, you know, kerosene lamps. It's bad for health. This is nighttime fishing, and it's bad for health because of the particulate matter and the pollution. And the business that we had at the time, over 12 years, we changed them to very specialized solar fishing lights. Right? That's ESG. Okay. I mean, people wouldn't see it as ESG. I see that as first mile ESG. So how do I break that back down to humanity? The fishermen and the fishing communities, you know, it's a hard life, it's a struggle, but they have that need to be productive and efficient in their fishing activities. That simple change from solar-driven fishing lights off kerosene saves them costs, saves them money, saves them health implications, and makes their lives more productive. And they're smart businessmen. That's ESG in action for me. You know, let's take another example very briefly. Mining, we're going to need more mining, not less. If you look at artisanal mining, the figures are staggering. Artisanal miners There's 45 million of them in 80 countries. They have 220 million dependents and 200 million suppliers. That's nearly 4% of humanity. And they are often demonized by the mining community. They provide 20% of the world's gold. So we focus on how do you work with those communities. And it goes from two people with a pickaxe, but more likely it's sort of small scale mining who have a lack of capital and they have a lack of equipment. And this is not about greenwashing. So I think we can learn a lot from the first mile. This is about living, being productive, feeding your family, and we work on that basis where these communities are at the beginning of very, very wealthy value chains, and a lot of wealth is extracted, not left behind. So we use ESG to help them build a case, attract capital, actually formalize their operations. And again, it goes back 4% of humanity. People don't realize that. So it's about action in the real world. So, the arc into greenwashing is in some ways a thing of modern neoliberal capitalism. And I'm not blaming people. If I can add this, I think, we saw a sort of 30-year period where sustainability and green, it began to gain momentum. There was a lot of voluntary initiatives and people were piling in. Companies were piling in the finance sector, in the industrial sectors, and excitement. But that voluntary component has now been caught up by the reg policy and regulatory component. We've seen that since about 2010 onwards. And that's created a gap between what people were doing and claiming and policy and regulation. That's the greenwashing challenge, right? So again, I think your positive approach to this is really healthy. It's not about shame and blame. Yes, there's some egregious actors who claim all sorts of green things, and the whole area of green crime and economic crime is something that we're now looking at, right? But the vast majority of actors, or as you say, no one wants to be the villain. A lot of companies got caught up in the excitement of sustainability, which is great, but they went beyond what they're doing. So that is about reducing the language, connecting it to your real actions, and staying authentic. And let me finish maybe on this point in terms of this question. Look at the political economy we have. Look at the autocracy. Look at the shift to the right. All of those things. That is the biggest advert you can possibly have for ESG. At a systemic level, ESG is about good governance. I see that as democracy, liberal democracy. At a systemic level, environment, we all know it manifests the problems, whether it's the fires in Los Angeles or the droughts in East Africa, or whether it's the problems in the Himalayas in terms of the water cycle. These problems are manifest. Different language describes them depending on the community, but everyone knows the planet is in trouble, right? Again, systemic. And at the heart of everything is if we don't get the social piece right, on a planet of 8.99 billion, 10 billion by the end of the century, if we don't get the social inequality dealt with, if we can't use regenerative capitalism to deliver more for more people, well, extractive capitalism, that will be the end of the game. And one of my benchmarks is Africa by 2050 will be the only continent growing. It's currently 1.4 billion. By the end of the century, they say 4 billion. It's got massive potential, massive resources. We need to leave more value behind. Capitalism needs to become regenerative. There's no guarantee that will happen, but ESG will help. And the role of investors, long-term investors, is critical. But the role of communities demanding their value, demanding dignity, demanding respect, whether it's fishing communities in East Africa, or whether it's the farmers in the Sahel, or whether it's the people living in the Cerrado or in Brazil or in the favelas. Dignity, demand respect, demand your value. And if capitalism can't develop that, right, we will not get to a regenerative system where we start looking after the planet.
Really beautiful. And you just built the perfect bridge for me to also call Rick in. Because now when we know the background, I really want to shed a light with Rick, who is really immersed in the current reality of things and these side of the stories. So Rick, I remember from our conversation, the thing that stuck the most with me is that you said, it's hard to always be frankly honest with my clients because they're not there yet. And that takes courage, but it also takes patience. Would you like to bring us a little bit on the journey of how greenwashing became like a shaming, blaming, and even into hushing culture? You're on mute.
Good catch. Yeah, thank you, Renee. I just want to say quickly, it was fascinating to hear from Paul the sort of development of the ESG acronym as well. I hadn't heard that story before from him, so really interesting. And also having lived in East Africa as well, some of the stories he was putting out. But yes, thank you. I work as a consultant and advisor to many businesses, and so I want to talk a little bit about the reality. Following that framing from Nicole and Paul, the reality that face businesses and many of my clients when it comes to greenwashing and talking about what they do around sustainability, and then more broadly also thinking about the reality they face and some of the barriers when it comes to ESG and sustainability. And of course, we'll touch on some of the buzzwords as we do that, including that new kid on the block, green hushing as well. When it comes to greenwashing, we do now have some really helpful regulation and guidelines in place, certainly here in the UK and in Europe as well. The principal pieces being the Green Claims Code in the UK, which is the government guidance aimed at businesses making environmental claims and protecting consumers from the consumer protection laws that we've got here. So it clarifies really how to stay on the right side of those consumer protection laws, essentially to stop a business misleading or directly lying to consumers about the environmental credentials of the product or service it sells in order to gain a competitive advantage. So as Paul mentioned, sometimes they're honest mistakes that businesses will make, and sometimes there's more sort of nefarious things going on and people deliberately making misleading claims to mislead consumers or customers. On the EU side, we have the European Green Claims Directive and the Directive on Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition, which is a bit of a mouthful. So these are in the process of becoming national law across EU countries, very similar to the guidelines in the UK. They're designed to ban greenwashing and misleading product information and improve product labeling. Both of these laws have significant fines attached to them for breaches, up to 10% of global revenue in some cases, and indeed companies have started to be issued with fines when found in breach. Alongside this, we're also increasingly seeing country and regional advertising bans for high polluting industries, much like cigarette advertising is banned in many countries. And this is often driven by NGOs and other pressure groups. But a couple of examples here, France have banned fossil fuel advertising, so oil and gas firms, since 2022. And similar bans are being considered in Canada and Ireland. Sheffield Council, regional council here in the UK, has banned advertising for airlines, airports, fossil fuel cars, fossil fuel companies on its billboards around the city. The city of Edinburgh up in Scotland have banned advertising for fossil fuel companies, airlines, airports again, fossil fuel cars, SUVs and cruise holidays. And indeed, there's various bans in the UK and France related to high sugar and high fat foods as well, both in terms of online and TV adverts, but also product placements and product discounts in large supermarkets. So kind of an interesting regulatory environment that businesses are now faced with, which is trying to really put the guardrails on around greenwashing, which is helpful in many cases. Then, of course, we've got the interesting and polarized political environment that we're now operating within, thanks largely to the administration in the US. The political winds have changed, and combined with that green claims legislation, it has led to this new phenomenon, if you like, called green hushing. So this is where companies might be doing good things, but not talking about them and not seeking to gain a competitive advantage by doing them. Really the opposite of greenwashing. And you can understand why companies might be afraid to say what they are doing for fear of the potential fines for breaking the law. Now we've got this regulation in place, or indeed for getting called out by NGOs or other activists or people in the media. And sort of a new layer on this, we now have governments trying to stop good practices. So earlier this year, for example, top law firms in the US were all sent a notification to stop their DE&I programs, their diversity, equity, inclusion programs. And if they didn't stop, the letter decreed they would lose all contracts with the federal government in the US. And all of their clients, all of the law firms' clients, would lose all of their contracts with the federal government. So an absolutely extraordinary state of affairs, a democratic government blackmailing its own corporations to stop assisting people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Something I never thought we'd see. Finally, just when thinking about constraints on ESG progress more broadly, we do have to touch on the entrenched financial and economic systems in which we operate. So when it comes to the financial system, we still operate very much in a short-term quarterly reporting environment. There have been some changes. For example, and Paul touched on this around wildfires, we're looking at insurance companies increasingly looking at long-term risk of climate change in particular. Some now refusing to insure homes and businesses in high-risk areas affected by extreme weather conditions. Private equity, an area which I do some work, and VC funds are looking at ESG factors now. We're looking at target acquisitions, but more from a compliance angle, and particularly for future IPO listings. There's a current example of that with the giant Chinese online retailer Xi'an, as it seeks to list on the London stock market. It's desperately scrambling at the moment to put together a sustainability strategy and try to pretend that its operations are not having vast negative impacts. In terms of capital flow, so of course some of the work that Paul was involved with early on in the noughties, we have to acknowledge that the ESG fund market has grown considerably in the last decade, which is fantastic, and thanks in no small part to the ESG sort of framework that was put together by Paul and his team. Although I would question a lot of the definitions of ESG in those funds, and indeed new regulation coming in the EU is resulting in many of those funds having to drop their ESG labels. So I think whilst progress has been made in the financial markets, the reality that I see with the businesses that I work with is that the CEO is not making short-term profit gains. They will not last long in their job. And for me, boards, when I'm putting strategies together, boards are often what block progress in the work that I do. And that's because they're under pressure from short-term shareholder demand. So for me, the financial markets still have a long way to go to really facilitate and assist where we need to get to. And my final point, just a quick one, a very small one, the global economic system, the one that we operate within, it's really built on and powered by fossil fuels. The reality is, as much as it pains me to say it, we cannot turn off the oil and gas tap today without it leading to economic collapse. But we absolutely have to start transitioning and fast. And really, there's no excuse now not to. Renewable energy is cheaper and faster to deploy than oil and gas. So yeah, the excuse is no longer there not to transition. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think you already mentioned it shortly that along the way we dive into reports. When we get scared to talk about it, we let the figure speak. And I think Scott, if we can bring Scott in, I would really like to ask him, if we get scared to talk about it, we'll let the figure speak. And I think you have a really unique view on that as well, and some insights you could share with people. Would you enlighten us with that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, really interesting conversation so far. The way I'm approaching the work that we do and the people we speak to is it's about doing everything with integrity and transparency. And you know, I think the key thing is that in the world that we live in right now, we're surrounded by lots of data points, but those data points, those ideas, they're full of uncertainty and doubt. And I think what we deal with in this world, in sustainability, in ESG, in all the good we're trying to do, is at some point we're just dealing with how do we manage that uncertainty. And it's like trying to ask a board to promise against something that they don't know. The boards are very reluctant to do that. So, you know, the way I look at that is that at some point in the future, we're going to look back at all these decisions we've made, all these actions we've taken, and realize that unfortunately many of them were wrong. But did we do them to be wrong? Many of us don't, because we're acting with that integrity and we're being transparent with it. And you know, I think that's the only way to go about. And the key thing with that is that you've got to talk about those things that you get right, of course, but you've also got to talk about those things that you get wrong. And speaking with people across the academic sector as well, in that sector, the peer review process is very good at putting those things that are right on a pedestal and really shining a light on them and celebrating them. The things that are not right, the things that have failed, the things that are wrong, as they go through that system, they get lost. But those things in the world of sustainability are even more important, I think, for us to know, so we don't all repeat those same mistakes. Now, if we look forward at this, I mean, you know, with all that uncertainty, with all these things that people are trying and getting wrong, but not talking about it, it really does lead us to a future where we might look back and go, well, if only we'd known better. But we do know better to some degree. And I think, you know, there's an analogy here that I use quite a lot, and that's if you look back at kind of Victorian medicine, you know, we wouldn't be drilling holes in people's heads to cure headaches today. But back then they weren't doing that because they were, you know, trying to be malicious or hurt people. They were doing it with the best intentions because that was the best evidence they had, the best kind of data they had. The good thing about medicine, though, is it is very well documented. So in terms of kind of learning from those successes, learning from the mistakes we did, we went forward with that integrity and transparency. And I think that's anyone in this field, the best that we can hope for is that we adopt those two principles.
I totally agree. And I love how you shed the light about, let's talk about what we do wrong, because we can only improve when we talk about it. Love that. Can I also ask Petter and Paul to come in now? Because I think it's a really nice starting point if we talk about restoring the humanity and morality of the story, because we came from one part and then we went into a completely different reality where we find it difficult to talk about this. Mike, can I also have Petter? Because I wanted to ask Paul and Petter, could you surely shine a light about your perspective on how do we restore the humanity and morality?
Petter, you can have that one. I'll join you.
Okay, yeah. Well, you know, those are pretty big words, and it's sort of it sounds like a very lofty ambition, but I think at the end of the day, what you really need to focus on is that we're dealing with people. I mean, for any business, any customer, any company, you will be selling to customers, and they are people, and they will have their own preferences and wishes and ideas about what is right and wrong and what is good and bad. And you know, to appeal to customers is one fundamental thing, element of bringing it back to the humanity, I believe. And the other one, of course, is you will also be running a business where you need to have good talent working for you. You want to attract the right people. They will be also driven by values in the way they choose where they want to spend their time and effort. And so, you know, I keep saying this, I mentioned it earlier today as well, that I believe that the whole ESG philosophy is really about business sense. If you get this right, if you do this right, you will be better off with your customers. You will be attracting the right people to work with you. You will be getting good financing to fund your business. You will be attracting the right investors to come and back up your business. So it's all a matter of, you know, good business sense in my point of view. And then, you know, by doing that, you will be bringing humanity back into it. That's my more kind of practical suggestion and approach to how to do that.
Ronnie, can I jump in though and build on what Petter said just really briefly? Look, I think there's both political and corporate gold and value to unlock if you make the humanity connection. And my mind, in terms of your question, goes to, I had my first business in Bangkok in 1992 called the Environmental Business Group. Bangkok at the time, 11 million people, awful pollution, 25% of the world's cranes, elected a green mayor, Kun Vichai, right, as an independent. The city elected a green mayor. Arc that over now in terms of that ability to connect to people. So we're working with one of the Brazilian states, Espírito Santo, right, which is on the Atlantic coast. And they have an incredible 500-year vision. They have an inspirational governor, Renato Casagrande. And what we're doing with them is we're looking ahead to the 40th anniversary of the Rio F Summit. And the idea is to create a sustainable state investment model. But that sounds, it sounds all good. How do you get money flowing into this state, which is dynamic and interesting and all those things? They've put, the governor has put the human piece at the center of it. So his capital is an island capital spread across a number of islands. You go back 15 years, massive pollution, right, from a particular iron and steel plant there. Over 15 years, they put the social piece, human well-being, cycle lanes, places people can walk at the epicenter of that, right? And that is political gold for him. Okay, it's not just messaging about sustainability. When people feel better and they have dignified jobs and they're on the right end of a progression over a period of time, that is gold, both politically and corporate. It's gold. So the massive steel plant there is ArcelorMittal. They employ 10,000 people, and I'll stop here. They were a big cause of pollution 15 years ago. Right now, it's the most nominated as the most responsible iron and steel plant in Latin America. All right, so that's about politics working with business, but providing the S for the community. That's how you connect with community.
I love
humanity.
Humanity. I really love what you just said, because Peter and I had a discussion about it as well, and I'm coming back to him later, and I'm going to save him for the last part on purpose, because he's going to dive a bit deeper into that, about really actually the first steps you can take towards that journey. But before we do, I just want to recap just shortly with Nicole and Scott. So if I can have Nicole back and Scott still on the screen, then I'll come back to you guys a bit later. About how do we restore that hope? How do people feel hopeful to talk about it again, to not feel the blaming, shaming culture, but let's be open to talk about it again and be hopeful about experimenting towards that goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good start with the talk about humanity, right? And, if we want to move beyond this, move ESG beyond this disillusionment and into durable action, we need to stop treating it like a promise of profit and start treating it for what it actually is in many cases for companies. And that's business hygiene and risk intelligence tool, as Paul earlier explained in its origin. ESG is not this feel-good story to tell necessarily. It's more of this lens to sharpen how we allocate capital, manage downside exposure, navigate complexity, and especially in capital intensive and regulatory heavy sectors like oil, as Rick was saying before. It should be integrated on how we evaluate these investments, assets, and strategic decisions, not isolated in these glossy sustainability reports and ESG reports, and the shift forward is talking about, how do we level out this playing field? And this is the great thing, because finally we're having this discussion. It's been 5 years. Where are we? Finally, we're having this discussion on greenwashing. And, if ESG is to survive this moment, we need to stop marketing it as moral virtue and discuss and understand the trade-offs in a humanistic perspective. If you're spending 2.5 million on carbon offsets and net zero initiatives, this organization could be taking away capital flow towards the workforce, for instance, causing thousands of layoffs. Everything is connected, right? So we need to talk about the humanistic and not just be hyper-focused. I think this is where we come in now, and we're going to restore credibility in ESG and treat it under the same scrutiny as other business decisions. No more vanity pledges, no more soft metrics that are hard to actually grasp upon. We're looking at it from a much more, tangible and operational and strategic concrete thing to give it credibility. And that's the real lever for resilience and intelligent growth there. So that's
beautiful.
Positive aspect.
Yeah.
Very sadly, we are pretty much out of time. Do you want to just sort of wind up now?
I'm gonna need 5 more minutes, Michael, if that's okay, because I really like we are almost at the end, but I really
Right.
want to go to Peter because we promised to reach out a book to the one with the boldest question, but it's your book, Peter, and I saved you for the last. I did that on purpose because I think you have the most tangible examples on how you can actually go from where we are now to the first steps you can actually do as a business or an individual or as a leader in this field.
Yeah, sure. Just one thing about greenwashing that I think is a point to keep in mind for everybody is that we think sometimes when we talk about greenwashing, we think that it's this sort of malicious, intentional act of lying to consumers or whatever, that because we think of the scandal with Volkswagen and diesel engines or whatever it is, but in many cases, I've seen I'm sure you have all seen cases of this, that people think they are doing well. Rick, you said that it's hard to tell the truth to clients. And it's like many companies think they are doing well. And then they have this glossy report that Nicole, you mentioned, that they have it on the shelf and it's made by a big reputable big firm. And it's there and they think, oh, we are doing great. We have that all. And we're in good shape, but they're not, right? And so they it's maybe unintentional and maybe even unknowing greenwashing, and we need to companies need to understand what actions they need to take, and that brings me to the wrap up, Renee. But you need to focus your business on what risks are you facing as a business and how do you address them. There's a whole lot of risks, and most of these ESG aspects that you are facing, they translate into some degree of risk for your business, financial risk often, and there are opportunities, and you need to basically pinpoint all of them and see what kind of impact they have on your business, and you need to quantify the effect of that, and also basically decide on what kind of actions you are taking to each one of them to address those. And that is a practical job, and it's more important to do those actions than to speak very loudly about to everybody about what you're doing. I'm often telling clients to get your act together and do all this work before you talk to anybody, and when you have it well documented, you can respond to people about it. But yes, you mentioned my book, Renee, and I'm happy to give it away. If you got a bold question from someone or you want to give it away to anybody, please do. Yes, I have some practical steps on that, and I don't think Michael is going to give us much more time to go into. But there are also, and I'm not here to do promotion, but if you do go to the website of the book, esgsprint.com, you can download tools and templates and stuff there also that you can really use to take your company through this process. But again, identify the risks, identify the opportunities, quantify them, address them as very, very practical things. And you are not done when you have a glossy report. You're done when you have addressed all those individual, each one of them, and you have clear actions that you're taking on them and that you can document. Okay, Renee, I'm going to wrap it up there. We're over time.
Yeah,
well,
and we're
thank
going
you
to
very much. Fantastic comment there, by the way. I thought you should see that one. Best ESG show I've tuned in for. How about that?
Great. Mike, can I just trade you for Paul for a second so we can wrap it up?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
I don't know where he's gone. That's the problem. Let me find him. Paul, where are you?
He's in the metaverse now.
Yeah,
Michael, you just lost a friend. Trying to get in for a few minutes and get a picture, but anyway, such is life. There we go. Yeah, I agree with you personally. It's the best show ever. Right, Rennie, over to you.
Yeah, and Peter, I just want to comment on the book because after we talked about it, I dove into your book, and I have a really extensive background in sustainability because I was born and raised into it. Reforestation efforts, carbon dioxide questions, and I really found I wrote reviews that as first, but also that it has really tangible, practical solutions. And I think that's really essential, especially once you start going on this journey. It's really helpful to read the book. I think it has tangible advice about how to get there. So I could really seriously advise people, buy the book, read it. It has tangible knowledge. So dive into that. And I really want to thank all of you. But in the conversations that I had with all of you, Rick really amazed me. He had a beautiful takeaway. So I didn't want to wrap this up with you guys, but I really wanted to give Rick the stage because he left even me inspired with his last words. So Rick, can I ask you if you want to wrap it up the way you did with me in our conversation?
No pressure, Renee. No, I just wanted to talk. I just took a step back when Renee and I were talking. Just to, we are facing some really big, really scary issues as humanity. And to touch on the human point that others did as well. And to be clear, for me, ESG or sustainability is not about saving the world. The world will continue. This is about saving humanity. Climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality. These are huge issues that are already starting to impact every single one of us. And in order to solve those big issues, we have to be bold. We have to take risks. We need to start setting big, hairy, scary goals as business leaders that we may not know how to achieve. And that's okay. There are now many solutions already out there to grasp hold of. And many of these will make life better and make business better. And I think this is the story that we as sustainability leaders have not been great in telling. We always focus on those scary issues and the focus and the things we need to stop doing. But we do need to focus more on the upside, the fact that the future will be better than the present if we tackle the issues and implement the solutions. But in taking bold action, in taking risks, we will make mistakes. And Scott mentioned it earlier as well. And that's okay. And that includes mistakes in marketing and advertising and how you talk about the work that you're doing. But as long as those are honest mistakes and you own up to them when you discover them, then actually you will gain more trust with your stakeholders, from customers, employees, and investors. So my key takeaway here is just to be bold, be ambitious, be positive, but be human and be honest.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I remember that you told me, let's struggle alongside each other.
Well,
And
thank you very much.
So thank you so much. And Michael, I'm so sorry for taking a bit more. I felt like guarding these
Well, thank you very much, everyone. That was a really good show. Really enjoyed it. And I do agree with those sentiments. I'll see some of you again shortly.